The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 29. Fifth Wheel. My dad had registered me at the local comprehensive school, not because I wanted to go or because it would improve my mind or my life's direction, but because it was the law. A month from now, I would once again enter another meaningless sausage factory of unfamiliar faces sizing me up and down, and sit before teachers who were just there to get paid. As far as I was concerned, it was all just another fucking brick in the wall. I was looking forward to living in Brighton though, and I was keyed up about the prospect of exploring the bright lights of the big city. I had already explored the cow fields and the country and was ready for something more. I wanted to get a part-time job, and I wanted to visit all the record shops, and I wanted to spend time with my brother. I had lots of exciting images floating around my head about what the next chapter of my life might look like if all went well. That night I packed all my things neatly in my suitcase and went to bed early. I prayed to Jesus with Auntie Joan holding my hands in hers. She encouraged me to pray for guidance and protection and wisdom. I did not sleep because I could not stop thinking about what would happen if Jesus was busy protecting or guiding someone else. I sat next to Uncle Jim in the passenger seat as he drove me to the train station in silence. I looked out of the window. The scene we inhabited was almost identical to a few months previously when he had rescued me from Becky's, except I wasn't crying and he wasn't the same man, because the shame at what he'd done had marked him. Uncle Jim's decision to touch my breast was something I sensed he deeply regretted, but he had to live with that, I didn't. Uncle Jim didn't say goodbye to me, he just pulled me into a stiff hug and let go of me very quickly. We were both relieved that the goodbye had looked normal. When the train pulled away, we waved a silent farewell. Something in me knew that I would be back at Doddenall's, however, a place that, despite its weirdness, had a womb-like quality to it, a place where I was safe from the rest of the world. I was sad to be leaving what had become familiar, but I was not overcome by the loss. I was sure that a better life was available somewhere down the tracks, and as I lugged my suitcase into an empty first-class carriage, I slid the door closed with a resounding thud. I then drew in a long, deep breath with the intent of releasing the past. I wondered whether the past could just evaporate. I hoped so. All I needed from the past were the memories without the hard edges. The train chugged through Dorset, stopping at every station along the way. Dorset, a 130-mile commute from London, was a tranquil and unspoilt place, a real-life postcard of overstuffed hanging baskets, thatched roofs, and bridle paths with Springer Spaniels yanking their owners who wore waxed anoraks and snooty middle-class expressions. But when the train exited Dorset and began winding its way around the Solent, the scenery changed. The contrast was unsettling. I had always liked slow and methodical train journeys because they permitted those seated beside the window momentary and anonymous glimpses into the lives of those living beside the tracks. But I was not just a common or garden voyeur, idling away time as I waited for my destination. I always got sucked into what I was seeing, an unnecessary involvement that my mind somehow insisted on. My realisation that the rush of neglected houses of working-class Hampshire were just symptoms of the neglected needs of the occupants was born from the empathy that was now being cultivated within me. I sat on the train perfectly still, with my attention focused outward, and I just observed. Sometimes from a place of detachment, but sometimes I was absorbed to the point that my imagination told me more than I wanted to know. I jumped when the conductor slid the door back. "Can I see your ticket, love?" Certain that he was going to ask me to move, I handed him my ticket, but he didn't. He let me stay in my first-class seat, in my first-class carriage that I had all to myself. Most of the passengers headed for the seats next to the buffet car. The conductor clipped my ticket and asked me whether I had been to Brighton before. I told him no, and that I was going to live with my dad. He smiled and told me I would like Brighton, that he used to go there on holiday as a kid, and he had liked the Palace Pier until one day he nearly stepped on a pigeon with a broken wing. I must have looked taken aback because he quickly shrugged his shoulders as if to communicate this no longer bothered him. He then told me he would keep an eye on my bike, which he had stowed near the front in the guard's van. 10 minutes later, he brought me back a Coke and a packet of crisps, and I didn't have to pay for it. He didn't tell me to relax, but I got the feeling he wanted me to. As the train left Hampshire and entered West Sussex, I brooded about the fact that my dad had not offered me the opportunity to say goodbye to his wife of 10 years. My dad was 65, free of the previous wife, but again not exactly single, and it was likely that I'd have another stepmother. But I had known my dad's ex-wife since I was 5, and I was upset that I would not see her again. I was the nearest thing she'd had to a daughter, and although we hadn't spent huge amounts of time together, our connection had been genuine. She had once put her arm around my shoulder and declared to a room full of people, "Sarah is all the way there and halfway back again." This affirmation allowed me to hope, if not believe, that I would make it all the way there and all the way back again. As soon as my mother found out that my dad had finally extricated himself from his bad marriage, she wasted no time sending my brother to live with him. He arrived at Brighton Station with a small bag of possessions that did not come close to representing 16 years of life. My brother had not finished his secondary school exams, but my mother was quick to point out that he wasn't exactly university material, and so what was the point in fantasising that he might one day become a doctor? Besides, it was her ex-husband's turn. Age 16, just a year older than I, my brother, who had been living with my dad for the past 2 months, had found a job grinding knives at a small factory for £60 a week. He was happy enough. I had not seen much of him recently, and so we had a lot to catch up on. I knew my brother would have already explored Brighton on his bike and would act as my guide, giving me a systematic and detailed tour of the city. I was excited about that. When the train pulled into Brighton Station, I could see my dad standing on the platform. He was wearing a belted aquascutum Macintosh and he was smiling. My dad was genuinely happy to have his children in his life full-time, rather than the irregular visits that had been the way things were for so long. The conductor helped me with my bike and then my suitcase, and he wished me luck. I thanked him and so did my dad. I pushed my bike towards the car park and my dad carried my suitcase. We were both walking towards our fresh new life, the sun shining through the curved glass of the iron roof of the train station. My dad's new car had a roof rack, and we hoisted up the bike and wedged it in as best we could. I went around it with a bit of rope to make sure it didn't fly off. My dad was already in the driver's seat, assuring me that he would drive slowly and the bike would be fine. My dad was an optimist, always had been. I was still adjusting to the idea that I would be living with Shirley's 2 daughters several miles away in the Swanborough flats at the top of the Whitehawk Council estate. My dad again assured me that I could visit night or day whenever I wanted, and I would have all this precious freedom in between. La la la, Sarah, you'll love it. I doubted I would. I thought Whitehawk was a slum and was horrified by the idea of living in the high-rise I was being forced to call my home. Although I was the product of a broken home many times over, I had lived amongst the middle classes, and I had lived for many years in the stockbroker belt of the home counties. Every child in England was aware of the class structure they were born into, and to live on a council estate was a real blow to me. The snob I had not known I was had the opinion that the Swanborough flats were built to house life's riffraff. My dad drove me through Kemp Town, past the marina, and then turned left towards my new home up near the racetrack. I began to consider in more detail the grim fact that in 2 days' time I would begin my first day at Stanley Deason High School. My new school was built to educate all the children who lived on the Whitehawk Council estate. I had only ever been a mediocre student, getting mostly C's, and this meant that I would not qualify to sit my A-levels, let alone attend university. Lots of C students in England in the 1980s started their adult life at the age of 16, and Stanley Deason would churn out its fair share. The majority of the kids would end up doing menial work just like my brother, or they would end up on the dole, or if they were lucky they might enrol in a vocational college. The rest would end up sniffing glue or injecting their veins with some substance that would offer temporary relief. My new bed was unwelcoming in all ways. The mattress was hard and stained, the pillows stuffed with cut-up chunks of foam, and there were no curtains on the windows. The room faced east, so an avalanche of sunlight poured in every morning, which meant I could not sleep past daybreak. I used socks as eye shades and managed to rig up a curtain using a double-folded sheet I nailed to the wall around the window, but I was not cosy, and not being cosy left me feeling angry. I did not warm to my soon-to-be stepsisters either, and they did not warm to me. I was the troubled teenager dumped on their doorstep. In a way, I felt as sorry for them as I did for myself. But animosity was the first and lasting barrier to us becoming friends. I had been given my own bedroom, and Heather, aged 16, and Jackie, aged 19, still had to share. This pissed them both off. Both girls had been through the mill in their own lives, the gory details of which I would find out later. But from the outset, all I knew was that I was disenchanted to a degree that neither I nor they had been expecting. If I could have reversed the journey and got back on the train that had brought me to this brightly lit hell, I would have gone. Shirley, my dad's new girlfriend and mother to Heather and Jackie, worked as a barmaid at a hotel on the seafront called the Norfolk. This was where she and my dad had met. Shirley's son lived somewhere in the centre of Brighton. I had not yet met him. Heather worked in the coffee shop in the same hotel as her mum, and Jackie worked as a receptionist at another hotel, the Crest, further along the front. Both Heather and Jackie were very pretty girls, and they looked harmless enough when we were introduced. However, dominance and surly assertiveness in the service of maintaining a rigid hierarchy took a hold, and both girls made it clear how they wanted things to play out. It didn't take long for Jackie's boyfriend, Andy, a local lad who worked for British Telecom, to petition my dad and Shirley over beer one night. The upshot was that he thought he should be allowed to move in with us too. He pointed out that he and Jackie had been together since secondary school, and they were approaching their 20s and wanted to take the next step. No doubt, with the air of frivolity that the alcohol had induced, my dad and Shirley thought this was a perfectly reasonable arrangement, and I was promptly told that I would no longer have my own bedroom, which I thought was perfectly unreasonable. The fact that this new arrangement was something I was expected to acquiesce to with a cheery smile did nothing more than weigh me down. The bedroom I now had to share with Heather was long and narrow. Heather's bed was at the other end of the room, and she had to walk past my bed every time she came in or out. My bed was a single, and because it was planted right by the door, I might as well have been sleeping in the hallway. And when my soon-to-be stepsister had to get ready for work early in the morning, she would turn the hairdryer on, whether I was awake or not. "Can't you dry your fucking hair in the living room?" I would scream. "No, I fucking can't. It's my fucking bedroom." And when I complained to my dad about Heather's behaviour, he listened but did very little to help me because he was secure in his place straddling the fence and didn't want to fall off. I understood in a way. At 65 he was doing quite well at orchestrating his life in a way that pleased him. He always made it clear that Shirley and I would have to share him, and he couldn't take sides. Because when one straddles a fence, I wanted to say, one can't. When I complained to Shirley about her daughter's behaviour, she told me in a tone that made it clear she was offended that Heather was a lovely little thing and had been since she was 2. "You're just making it up because you're just a little bitch," she hissed down the phone. "You wait, I'm going to tell your mum." For Shirley, protecting her lying little daughter at all costs and at my expense had turned into a sport, and she was playing to win. Indeed, ultimately Shirley was victorious. Heather was empowered, and I had no recourse because my dad had no intention of getting off the fucking fence. I occasionally experienced inner peace. The only time I was at peace during this period was when the mental chatter that consumed my mind spontaneously dissipated, which only happened when I was walking on the beach or around the racetrack at night. For the briefest of moments, I was able to glimpse reality as being smooth and light in spite of the crappy outer circumstances of my young life. But then, one day out of the black, another player was added to the dysfunctional cast, and the shit show got a whole lot worse, and so did my mind. One Thursday night, Heather brought a young lad home she had met on the bus. They were strangers, but behaving like boyfriend and girlfriend. John soon became Heather's real boyfriend, her first love. He was 19, 3 years her senior, unemployed and rudderless. I overheard him tell Heather about his shitty home life while listening from the kitchen. John was emotional in the telling, and I suspected he was telling the truth. It all sounded too real not to be. Heather took pity on him, and this is what he had wanted. He was soon sleeping on the settee, but this arrangement, like everything else in my life, got a renovation pretty quickly. I kept blinking, hoping I would wake up back at Dodonall's with Jesus' clasped hands secured to the wooden plaque on the wall above my head. But one day I woke up to the sound of the hairdryer, and Heather had turned the radio on too, and John was sleeping in her bed. This cosy arrangement soon became a nightly occurrence, and I knew that if I told my dad or Shirley, my dad would listen but wouldn't say much, and Shirley would not believe me. I told my brother what was going on when we were riding a bus together one day. There was nothing he could do, but he assured me that he knew I wasn't lying, and I was grateful just to be believed. Although Heather's new boyfriend was shifty and a manipulator, he was respectful of the fact that I was also sharing his girlfriend's bedroom, and never forced me to endure what I dreaded I might have to. The fact that they didn't try to have surreptitious sex while I was sleeping was such a relief that I was grateful in a way to John, in spite of not liking or trusting him. Heather was smitten and so blind to the fact that her boyfriend was an opportunist with a petty criminal record and his eye to the main chance, just like everyone else trying to survive on their wits. I felt sorry for him in the same way I felt sorry for most people stuck on planet Earth, and I realised that the compassion I felt for John was similar in depth to the compassion that was building for all the other misfits who had crossed my path. My life was full of them. My mum, my dad, Roy, Uncle Jim. However, I noted that I did not yet feel any compassion for Shirley. The walks along the beach or around the racetrack at night now did not yield a state of awareness that allowed me to glimpse reality in its raw and natural beauty, because my mind was angry. I could not stop regurgitating my conversations with Shirley, and in them I demanded justice. Had I been able to slip into that mental space, had I been allowed that respite, I would have found my situation much easier to deal with. All I could think of now was that I had been peeling apples with Auntie Joan in the parish of Camelot and saying nightly prayers to some invisible god 2 months previously, and now I was the unwelcome fifth wheel to a foursome with nowhere to hide except the toilet. The tension would have been unbearable for a dead person, let alone a bunch of kids trying to get through their day. I no longer gave a shit about anyone's feelings, because I no longer gave a shit about anything. The thoughts in my head were a salad of spiteful accusations, blame and antipathy of such a high calibre that the girl who used to be me was gone. I was not yet 16. One night everybody had had enough, and Jackie, Andy, Heather and John reported me to my dad and Shirley. They had done so secretly, so I would not witness their duplicity or have a chance to defend myself. I had recently been more belligerent than usual and did not do my share of housework. I had not washed any dishes or cleaned up their dog shit. And when Andy left dirty rings in the bathtub and just shrugged when I mentioned it, I became loud and no one knew how to handle me. I scared them. Their portrayal, neatly packaged, was no doubt unflattering but accurate, but they were not innocent either. My dad knew this, but he never let on. He simply telephoned me and calmly told me to pack my bags. As I waited for him to pick me up, I was semi-expecting some nasty scene to ensue, but my dad didn't show any signs of being angry. We simply drove back to his flat in silence, with no edgy undertones. Somewhere in the back of my dad's mind, he must have known that throwing 3 strange teenage girls together, a couple of teenage boyfriends sprinkled in for good measure, held little chance of a good outcome. My dad had hoped that things would turn out well because he always wanted things to turn out well. When things turned out well, his life was easier to deal with. And so it was in that October of 1982, as originally planned, I moved in with my dad and Shirley and my brother. Shirley slept next to my dad in their bedroom, and I slept on a gold settee opposite my brother in the cramped little living room. My dad had purchased my new bed from a second-hand shop down the road. I stared at it horrified. Somewhere back in the early 70s it might have been the showy centrepiece of someone's living room, but now each of the 3 velour seat cushions were bald. I surmised that a lot of fat asses must have sat on it prior to it becoming my bed, but something about it was familiar. I couldn't identify what.